So in the interest of time, I'm going to get started. I would like to start with a land acknowledgement first. So we wish to acknowledge this land on which we gather upon today. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. So I want to, good afternoon, and I want to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. For those of you who don't know me, I am the DFCM Mentorship Lead. So welcome to the session on Mentorship for Retirement, Perspectives to Consider. The session is designed to be informative, practical, very importantly, to highlight next steps for mentorship, options for you to consider during transition to retirement. So COVID has definitely impacted our thoughts about retirement. There are many resources on physician retirement, professional identity, finances, health, practicing safely. Really, when I looked into this topic, it was overwhelming. So at the end of the session, I will share some resources, and the resources are also available on our website. So as the Rumi quote says, or suggests, whoever enters without a guide will take 100 years to travel a 2-day journey. So I'd like us to keep that perspective in mind. And I think that's the sort of flavor in terms of designing this session, is to sort of hear insights and perspectives from faculty who've retired to save us from reinventing the wheel, so to speak. So I'm grateful to the panel members that they have generously agreed to share their wisdom and guidance. And a huge thank you also to Maddie Morissetti, who's the administrative support for DFCM mentorship. Without her input, none of this would have been possible. I wouldn't have been able to organize it. So thank you, Maddie. And can we go to the next slide? So the flow of the session will be, each of the panel members will have 7 to 10 minutes to speak, to share, and we will discuss questions after all the panelists have spoken. And I will quickly review pertinent resources at the end. And I encourage everyone to please, please, please take 2 minutes to complete the feedback form, which will really impact what post-session mentorship options and resources we develop. So Maddie, could you just go back to the prior slide? No, the one before, yeah. So I also want to express that when notice of this session went out, there was overwhelming interest and support. We've had over 80 people expressed interest in this session. And I want to thank specifically the people who took the time to submit questions. Your questions were really important. I shared them with the panelists, so it has directed what session objectives we've created, and they're also impacting what resources were curated to share with you at the end. So thank you for taking the time to complete the questions. So some of the questions that you did ask were, what gives you purpose? What motivates you? What drives you? These were some of the things you wanted to hear from our panelists. In addition, you wanted to know what surprised our panelists the most when they retired. So we'll come back to these questions in question period, and I'm hoping there's lots of time for questions. So next slide. Just back one slide. Yeah, so the learning objectives for this session were to be able to hear from recently retired faculty on the joys and challenges of retirement, and also to have your questions answered, and if not answered, at least raised in the form of discussion. Post-session objectives, and I think that's where the bulk of the work might actually be, is to consider what contributions you may want to make as you transition in your retirement path, and also to reflect on how to prepare for retirement and if and how mentorship can play a role in that. So lots of thinking after the session, and I'll just pitch this here that we will be distributing resources a week after this session if there's interest. So without more further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists. Dr. Helen Batty will speak first, Dr. David White, who will speak next, and Dr. Barbara Stubbs. So Dr. Helen Batty, next slide, is a professor in the University of Toronto's Department of Family and Community Medicine. She's taught for more than 45 years. She's received many awards in family medicine teaching and faculty development. She has contributed significantly to educating Canada's future physicians by building capacity among academic family medicine educators. Helen retired in 2019, but is as active as ever and continues to teach in the master's degree program and also does community-based virtual clinical work. Dr. David White, newly retired recently, as of 3 months ago, actually, January 2023, Dr. White stepped down from his role as Vice Chair Family Medicine, Family Doctor Leadership. David has 40 years experience as a clinician, teacher, and researcher. He's practiced in Northwestern Ontario, teaching hospital family practice units, and was in a community-based teaching practice affiliated with North York General Hospital. He helped establish the first practice-based research network at U of T, which has grown into the DFCM-wide utopian. And the final speaker will be Dr. Barbara Stubbs, who's an associate professor and former director of professional development program in our department. Barbara actually was integral. She was our inaugural DFCM mentorship leader. She established the network and for many years has been recognized for her outstanding commitment to mentorship, including receiving the May Cohen Award for Women Mentors in 2014. Barbara retired in 2022, but continues to serve as a much valued mentor. So welcome to all our panelists, and I invite Helen to unmute and start us off. Thank you. Oh, and just some brief notes. You'll have the opportunity to put your questions in the chat, so please do so if you're thinking of anything ahead of time. Go ahead, Helen.
Well, thank you so much, Viola, and it's already a joy to be seeing colleagues, and I hope to see more of you as the hour goes on. I truly am honored to have been invited to join the panel, and I hope my contribution adds some insights to the challenge of planning and coping for what I think are totally the unknowables of retirement. This image of fog, which I have on one of my 2 slides, is from a very similar STFM retirement preparation workshop that was offered by Lucy Candib, who all of you should know as a really significant writer, thinker, speaker in family medicine from Boston. She showed us this slide in 2018 when STFM came to Toronto. And surprisingly, this image has been very reassuring to me over the past 3 years. One knows that one must inevitably walk forward down the path, but it really is impossible to make concrete plans. I think that's my message here. It's very unknowable, and you need to be prepared to be flexible and to learn step by step how to cope with what's going to happen next. So I'm going to talk very briefly about my journey so far and answer a couple of the questions that appealed to me from the ones submitted. I retired after 45 years and 30 days working at Family Practice Health Center at Women's College Hospital. And I have very much enjoyed being a generalist family physician, and I still see that as a very primary identity. I had a sister-in-law who said, when you take a sabbatical, the first 50% of your sabbatical, you're just picking up a few stitches in the knitting, and kind of, you know, catching up on things you were too busy to do when you were working. So certainly that was one of my anticipated activities. And, you know, 2.5 years later, I'm still picking up stitches. Particularly, I had quite a surprise. I recently had successful cataract surgery, and all of a sudden I could see cracks in the plaster and cracks in the tile. And so anyway, there are a lot of stitches in that knitting to be picked up and fixed. But my 3 anticipated activities were gardening, which has been a lifetime hobby of mine, and all the botany and everything associated with it. Advocacy and double advocacy. I'm like everyone concerned about, you know, what kind of climate action can be taken. My particular interest, not surprisingly perhaps, is soil renewal and learning about regenerative agriculture, and then feeding that into reducing processed foods in the food chain, improving metabolic mitochondrial health, reducing the NLRP3 inflammasome sensitivities everybody seems to have. So it's a passion and motivation of mine, and you can find me on Twitter commenting about it, and I still read a lot of resources in that area. And I was hoping to write about all of those things. Plus, people like Melbourne's know I owe them a big report, because I've been doing a essentially lifetime cohort study of the class of 73 at U of T, and the careers of all my classmates, particularly the 35 women in that class of 256. What actually happened? Well, the garden looks great. Any of you who want to come and visit and have tea, you're more than welcome. Let me know. However, then the pandemic came within about the first 6 months of my retirement. And, you know, I got busy sewing masks and doing real knitting for real new babies that were arriving, grandchildren of my friends. But that actually didn't last. What saved me through all of this is the teaching that Viola mentioned. Judith Parenson and Abbas have so kindly included me ongoing in the INTAP program. And I've also been invited and have worked on the Faculty Awards Committee of DFCM. And so I've really enjoyed doing that. I've also had an opportunity to tune into Nick Kimlott's PSWG, Peer Support Writing Group at Women's College, which is a great group of colleagues, includes Sheila Dunn and other people. So I was lucky to have those, because they became lifelines to me. Because what I wasn't expecting was, within the first 6 or 9 months, I realized that my spouse's health was deteriorating. And in fact, he was starting to have quite a lot of trouble walking, and was diagnosed as early Parkinson's, but that diagnosis didn't stick. It was obvious that he was actually deteriorating pretty quickly, and I pushed to have him investigated. And a year ago, almost today to the day, he had successful neurosurgery for normal pressure hydrocephalus. So that has left me with 18 months of caregiving, which was tough. And in addition, I also had an adult child who moved back home on medical leave from university. So I've learned what it means to be a caregiver. Luckily, that's actually, I hope, a phase that's kind of fading. They're both much better. And I'm spending a bit more time with my friends. So this picture of the burners of my actual stove is a model for thinking about what are your priorities. The burner that's covered with a heat diffuser, it represents work. Right now, that burner on my real stove, there was supposed to be a light diffuser there. I don't know where it went. I guess it's not my real stove anymore. Somebody improved the photograph However, one of those back burners doesn't work on my real stove, and I'm not actually working at the moment either. I ended up taking a medical leave from the virtual consulting and group therapy I was doing. But you can see one burner is really on high full, and there's another one that's small. And I think that's an image to think about. You can't have all the burners running all the time, really ever in life. So the other two burners are health, friends, and family, the other three. I think right now I'm actually doing a bit more work on the friends burner. So I'm involved in a genealogy online group that actually is home based in Ottawa, and the secretary is a friend of my husband's wife. But one of my longtime friends since childhood is actually a very active participant as well. And I've committed to learning to play Catan online, because then I can play with a high school friend of mine once a week who is practicing up for a tournament. So that's my quick image. And I was going to talk about how did I prepare for retirement, but my time is more or less up. I think you want to move on, Viola.
Thank you, Helen. I really like your 4-burner model, and we'll come back to that in the questions, and I'm sure we'll have time in the questions to discuss how you prepared. David, can I ask you to unmute?
Thanks very much, Viola. It's, as Helen was saying, really a privilege to be part of this. And appreciate the 4 questions that you sent. So how did I know it was the right time for retirement? I think the toughest thing is self-awareness. It's something we're encouraged to develop our entire lives. I remember going to the retirement of a pediatric surgeon, the pediatric surgeon at North York General Hospital, who said, I'm in the sort of job where it's better to retire half an hour too early than 5 minutes too late. And it's well documented for surgeons, I think less well documented for family doctors, but ours is an extremely challenging job. And if you're really self-aware, you start to be aware of, and it's a big advantage of having residents and students, you start to be aware of how smart they are and how much they remember. Maybe still got a few things that you can teach them, but being aware that you're maybe not as sharp as you used to be is actually quite challenging, and it's difficult to admit, particularly when we have high standards for ourselves. I'll just leave it at that, but it is the most challenging. One of the ways is looking at people around you, and I think many of us will have had the occasion to look after physicians who, for whatever reason, pride, finances, identity that they don't want to give up, keep practicing, and it's really quite sad. There's also the health issue. For me personally, I was going to put off having my feet operated on until I was 70, forgetting that it was a condition that was gradually getting worse. And the orthopedic surgeon had told me that it was a 4 to 6 month recovery from each one. Orthopedics' view of family medicine, by the way, is that particularly when you're teaching residents, I could just put my feet up on the desk and recover while the residents did all the work and came in to report. So that was interesting. But anyway, that was one of the things that moved it a little ahead. I couldn't quite make it to 70 before having that done, but it was still planned. The drive to keep up with changing practice really couldn't get it into the newer diabetes drugs. I felt the older ones were doing a great job. That was a sign. And caring and cynicism. I had to struggle with a sort of dark outlook all my life and maintain an optimistic outlook. I think I've always been caring toward my patients. But if you notice that creeping up, and if you're going from that incisive mind and the critic to being an old curmudgeon, maybe that's time to get out. Are you considering still being involved with academia, and if so, how? I took a gradual a gradual change. Probably the biggest thing to give up was in 2017 when I became president of the College of Family Physicians and realized I wouldn't be able to keep doing obstetrics. And that was extremely difficult to give up, even though it was completely impractical. I was traveling and that sort of thing. I stopped clinical practice in July of 2020 and continued my vice chair job that Viola sort of gave a detailed overview. So that was my formal role, and informal roles like mentorship in particular really, and broader academic activities, particularly doing reviewing, as well as helping to support people who need help. Sometimes you get the query about, and you know what, I'll paste all my notes in the chat. So if Bill has to cut me off, it's all there. But a question mark about financial support. Some people will pay you for what you do and others not so much. How did I plan or prepare? So number one, there's plans and then there's reality. And Helen has alluded to some of the things that come up. But it's important to give yourself a really long runway. There are some great resources, particularly the OMA, ones that I found helpful. And all of you who are here today, I think we'll be getting some resources from Viola, which are in the category of what would I have liked to know ahead of time. There's some very useful things in those documents that you'll be receiving. For practice and transition, give yourself a long runway for this. And 2 years is not too long. I think particularly for finding a suitable practice partner, when you're in a group, you want someone who's good for your patients, and that you connect with and that your partners will connect with. Notifying patients, the minimum is, I think, 3 months, but 6 months is far better. And you really need to be organized about that. And then various physicians have ways of saying goodbye. I went to a seminar that Cal Gutkin gave at Family Medicine Forum on how he did it. And this brings me to the unanticipated issue of, we've just passed the anniversary of COVID being declared a provincial emergency, and we all had to change practice. And so I couldn't see people in the office due to COVID. And that really complicated saying goodbye to patients. And then planning for activity, having meaningful activities and things that you care about in your life, to me is a lifelong activity. For me, it's been music and family, actually in the reverse order. But really important, and I'm very fortunate, and probably one of the most significant things, and again, Helen has alluded to this, is it really matters to care deeply about your family and your spouse, because you have the opportunity to spend more time with them, and that's a really great thing. Some people gear up into that, others sadly don't have it as much. And then the question is there anything I would do differently? I think very much, but there's some things that I have found more challenging to just accept than others. One is living off your savings rather than having an income. And I already alluded to the physicians who haven't planned for this, and it's getting more and more challenging for, I think, family doctors in particular. But having the resources to retire is extremely important. So that's a lifelong planning thing. And I won't get into that other than to allude to it. You are less relevant. You don't get as many calls. You don't get as many emails. Those you do get, you tend to respond to right away. That I've actually found relatively easy. And then, of course, you're available for all sorts of little tasks and things that used to take you maybe 20 minutes. You look up and you spent 20 hours going down some rabbit hole on the internet. Helen does, I gather, some useful things on Twitter. For me, it's just a complete waste of time. And I come away thinking, is the world really that bad? I better not post anything. But having time, and so one of the things I'm doing is I actually keep track of everything I do, including the embarrassing, like, well, spent this amount of time doing junk. But it does mean that the great thing is that you can read, you can spend time. We're fortunate we have 2 grandsons, and those meaningful kinds of things. And of course, getting into my studio that I love is really key. And I'll wrap it up there. Thanks.
David, thank you so much for that authentic sharing. And I don't think you're less relevant, and I'd hesitate to say anybody who has retired is so, but I appreciate your perspective and thank you for sharing. So we'll move on to the last panelist. Barb, it's a pleasure to introduce you. Please unmute and share your wisdom.
Okay. So thank you, Viola, for inviting me to be a part of this presentation. And I really appreciate the opportunity to reflect on my experience. Actually, having this panel to be part of has been really good because it's helped me to look at what I've learned over the last year, but also I really wanted to hear what Helen and David had to say too, because I think we all learn from each other. And I so respect both Helen and David having been partners over the years with helping people with senior promotion. So I feel like this is sort of like, we used to have basics and then beyond basics, we have senior promotion workshop. This is beyond senior promotion, right? So this is the reward. And I think it's really important to talk about retirement as the reward after a fulfilling career, and that it's not a taboo subject, and it's something that we should really be thinking about. And having done a lot of professional development workshops, this is really the first time we've done something like this ever. So good for you, Viola, for getting this off the ground. I retired from my academic practice in the spring of 2022. So I'm just under a year after having had a wonderful career. I was based at UHN for over 40 years. I never left. So I'm one of those people. And I see that Jeff is part of this. And he and I sort of have had this ongoing wonderful relationship over the years. Is like, who's going to hang in there the longest? So Jeff, you won. I've had a variety of career transitions over these 40 years. And I see retirement as an extension of a career phase, as there's just as much thinking and work involved. So briefly today, I'm going to share with you 3 broad topics based on some of the questions that you were asking. First is the planning I did in advance. Second is the steps involved in the process. And then thirdly is what I've learned. So to begin, the planning. So I first started thinking and reading about retirement and pre-retirement when I participated in many of our professional development workshops over the past 15 to 20 years. And really it was learning about the idea about having physician life cycles in our careers and the stages involved in our professional lives. And I vividly recall Helen talking about our roles as we became older faculty members and how we can all aspire to become wise elders. One of my favorite books, and this is for everybody that's in the audience, is to know that there's a book for faculty called The Vitality of Senior Faculty Members. Here it is. Snow on the roof, fire in the furnace. Helen, do you remember that one? It's, I have it here, actually. I've got a number of books that I'm going to just show. That's, if you can read that. So that talks really about how important it was for older faculty members at the university level to be really supported and protected, and this was not going to be a waste of time if you invest in your senior faculty members. And I felt that what I got out of that was that at this point in time, mentorship was a very important function of this stage in our life cycle. And hence, I really embrace that as a topic. Then in our physician wellness workshops, we spoke about reflecting on our values and priorities in life and thinking about what our passions are and what we wanted to accomplish in the years we had left. And that was actually a new thing. We never think that we're going to get old and get sick. I've had so many partners who got old and sick very quickly and then just dropped off the cliff. And that's been devastating for me to see people that never really got to retire in a way that they'd have meaning. And that had a big impact on me. It was then that in some of these workshops, we talked about write your eulogy, and there's a concept of building a life you can retire to. And I thought that's really important, that this is not a taboo subject. We have to think about the next stage. So then I really started to imagine what a life could look like outside of academic medicine that could be as rewarding and fulfilling, because frankly, our careers have been so rewarding and fulfilling. And it's one of those things that I realized it wasn't going to happen by chance. It's not just going to happen. You have to think about it. And everybody knows I love to plan, which has been a big problem during the pandemic, is you can't plan anything. You just sort of, maybe we could have dinner with our son. And then, of course, it doesn't happen. So these are the things that have been an issue for the pandemic. So the planning I did started with attending an OMA workshop 5 years ago with Kirk, and then reading several excellent books. For example, Life After Medicine. Life After Medicine. Can you read that? This is the one that the OMA workshop hands out. So I've actually got 3 copies of this. And then there was another one that I actually found when my mother passed away, and my mother was an avid reader, and this was called Transitions by William Bridges, Making Sense of Life's Changes. My mother was a teacher and taught for many, many years. And so these are some of the things that I've learned by watching other people. Another book that's been very relevant for me is the book The Medical Marriage by Wayne and Mary Sotil. They were the ones that wrote The Resilient Physician. So as I'm married to a former academic family physician who retired in 2019, there were many important principles that came up in the medical marriage book for me, and that was to recognize that the decision to retire is a marital and family issue and not an individual one. To retire while you have the perception of good health, that makes a difference. Like if you don't feel like you're healthy, sometimes you hang in to your career because you think, well, my network is physicians. They're all going to look after me, and they'll be able to keep me connected to the people within the hospital. You feel like there is some sort of safety about being in that environment in terms of networking. It's important to start early in your career to ensure that you'll have adequate financial resources upon retiring. I know, David, you've referenced that, and I think it's important to have frank conversations with your financial advisors as to say, when is the time? They all have formulas about 4% and all of this, but sometimes you really do have to feel, especially if you've grown up where your parents grew up during the Depression, and then if I'm the next generation, I keep everything. And so it's a very important thing to feel, at what time do I feel that I could do this? And then learn to enjoy a range of activities outside of medicine. But in the medical marriage book, they talk about begin early to think of retirement as your final career, because retirement provides the opportunity to explore the vast, wonderful universe that the arduous pursuit of medicine virtually precludes. And I think that's a really important concept. So I've had many opportunities to learn from other medical colleagues who have retired and what has worked for them. But this is actually a really personal endeavor, and it's not the same for everyone. It's like the decision when you start a family or when you get married. I remember thinking, this really feels to me, especially in the last year of my practice, it felt to me like being in grade 13. I don't know if a lot of people don't remember what grade 13 was like, but you know what? Everybody else coming into the school is younger and it's time to leave. And I remember thinking with grade 13, I didn't want to leave my high school. I loved my high school, but it was time to go. So I felt that there was sort of this sort of 50-year gap between the two me's and how I felt in the final year. So what I did in terms of planning for retirement, which has been described by other people that I've talked to that has been helpful, is I gradually scaled back by working less hours in clinic. Now I had to actually figure out a way to do that was still enabled me to be a partner. So that required me to think about how many patients was I going to keep accepting? And that was tough to be able to sort of know at some point, I'm not going to be taking on new patients. And I'm going to be spending more time with my patients. And this is where the article that Nick Pimlott wrote in the Globe and Mail that I just thought was so fabulous was the feeling that we need to slow down to be able to keep up with the complexity of our older patients. I remember Dave Davis talking about this when he was in our group, saying that, Barb, as you get older and your patients get older, they become harder and harder to deal with. And I was finding that that was so true. The other thing I did, and this is what I want to thank Jeff Bloom for, was that he enabled us when Kirk and I were working to take several short leaves of absence. So it wasn't a formal sabbatical. We took a couple of months off in the fall for a couple of years in a row. And that was really good because we could see what life was like for us to have more leisure time together, to establish new routines. Now, the fact that he broke both arms on a bike trip and I spent those 3 months looking after him meant that it wasn't necessarily, the kind of experience that we were expecting, but it was actually a good eye opener that we could hang out together 24 hours a day and really still be in love and enjoy each other's company. The other thing is we knew that it would be important for us to stagger our retirements so that there wouldn't be too many changes simultaneously. So Kirk retired in December of 2019. And everybody says, oh, you got out just before the pandemic. Well, it was totally, for him, was not what he was expecting his retirement to look like. And I hung in for 2 years because, frankly, I didn't want to abandon my patients. I felt it was important to still be there to help them through this really, terrible time for all of us. So what were the steps involved in the process? So when I knew that the time had come, that it was actually, everything was actually starting to go really well. My teaching was going well. My patient care was going well. Things were going, I could see that there was going to be this sweet spot where I did not want to, I wanted to be able to leave on a high. And in fact, that was what I did. And this was, the first thing I did was have an important conversation with my chief, Camille Lemieux, who gave me the green light. She said, do it. We often will need permission. We often feel like we need permission to say, okay, it's time. And so Camille provided me with the necessary advice and support, especially with information about policies and procedures, both for the DFCM and UHN. And this is where Jeff was actually very helpful too, around, what the steps involved in leaving a foe. You just can't leave. There has to be checks and balances, and there was a process for that. So I gave my partnership almost 6 months notice, and I spoke with my trainees and my allied health colleagues individually as well, so they wouldn't learn about my plans through an email. But then I wrote a letter of farewell to my patients and to my circle of consultants. That was hard because I wanted to let them know that I really wanted to thank them for what they did and provide them with information about my replacement plans. So I've been very fortunate to have an excellent former resident take over my practice. And this is where I really felt like that exactly, David, to your point, finding the right person was really critical for me to feel like I was doing the right thing. So in the time leading up to my departure, I found that the majority of my patients wanted to come in to say goodbye to me in person. I didn't have a huge practice. I had between 450 and 500 patients. So it wasn't a huge practice compared to a lot of other people. But these were people, many of whom that I've cared for over 35 years. In fact, one of my patients I have known for over 50 years because I'd met her when I was working on a science fair project and she had been one of my mentors. So, we go back to 71, 72. So in spite of COVID precautions, there was a lot of hugging for the last 4 months of my practice. And it was important for me to I was doing a lot of work, making sure that my notes were up to speed, that every patient's chart was as detailed as possible so that there'd be no gaps. And then the other thing I did was I happily accepted all plans for retirement parties and gatherings. Because, it's easy to feel like I'm just going to sort of fade away. But no, I really felt it was important and valuable for me to speak about what my work family meant to me and how grateful I was for their role in my career. And I had 40 years of stories to share too. So everybody knows that I can chat. So it was important for me to hear from others about the impact of my work and the contributions that I'd made too. Then there were lots of other mundane steps like archiving. I went through my emails and I archived all the meaningful work emails that I didn't want to lose, and notifying all the organizations I belonged to. And you start to realize I belong to a lot of things. So I had to let people know about my change in status and contact information, for example, U of T, the college, OMA, CMPA, and CPSO. I maintained my work email for 5 months after I left in order to be able to do this really carefully. I did not regret, this is capitalized, I did not regret giving up my access to PSS, my inbox, and my messages. And I do not regret leaving before Epic started, and Epic and PSS do not talk to each other. So I was glad not to be having to deal with that. So what have I learned? So I've been retired for almost a year now, and I'm still in a period of transition and reflection. Every new beginning starts with an ending, so you have to start with that. I'm now enjoying having the time and freedom to pursue my personal goals. I'm exercising more. I'm spending time with cherished friends and family. We're starting to travel, like that's not been something we've been able to do or feel safe about doing. And we're living for extended periods of time at our place on Georgian Bay, so I'm out of the city a lot. I'm having fun trying out new vegetarian recipes on Kirk. So cooking has been something that I've always sort of done in a way that, you know, let's just do it. But I'm being more mindful of that and having fun with that. It does take a while to decompress. And I feel like I've been memory foam, you know, that memory foam, you go down, pushing, you know, all of the stresses of the last couple of years. I'm feeling like I'm starting to decompress. But Viola, I still keep lists of things to do. I've been careful not to get overly committed or programmed just in order to stay busy. But I have found meaning with my ongoing Toronto Physicians Choir that I co-founded 5 years ago. And I've been busy with other clubs and volunteer activities. I'm actually reconnecting with friends I had before medical school. Helen, I heard about you and your high school friend. It's interesting. We do go back to those people that we've known from before. And I'm now singing in my high school reunion choir. And I think it's important to have friends who are happily retired. And I'm thinking about teachers that I know who all have really nice pensions too, by the way. And where the focus on our conversations isn't on lengthy discussions of giving up your identity, which is what we tend to do as physicians. And we could go on about that. But really, it's how to find ways to have a meaningful life. We still learn from our peers, and I've had the good fortune of retiring at the same time as a close physician friend, and we're navigating this experience together. So thank you for this opportunity to share my retirement story with you all.
Thank you so much, Barb. And I'll just comment from Helen's dock in the fog to David's long runway to your building a life that you can retire to. There's a theme here in terms of being able to prepare, but not being able to predict what necessarily is going to happen. So I'd like to hear a little bit from our participants. And so there's a poll. If you could take a minute or two to actually let us know, or let the panelists know when you're thinking of retiring, and also what factors are most crucial to your planning retirement, whether that be finances, health, safety, or any other factor that's integral to your retirement planning. So Maddie's going to pull up a poll, and I'm hoping people will take one or 2 minutes to answer the poll questions, and then we will move on to questions from the participants for the panelists. So when are you considering retirement? In 1 to 2 years from now, 2 to 5 years from now, or more than 5 years from now? So we have, oh, wait. over, I guess 100% of you are thinking, are taking that long runway to planning. So that's very interesting. And if you can put in the poll, just what factors are most integral. Oh, the poll is not, oh, people couldn't answer the poll. Maddie? I'm not quite sure. I think we're having some technical difficulties. Maddie, were you able to relaunch the poll?
Yeah, I just hit activate again, so it should work.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if when I went to present, it may be deactivated.
Okay, so if you could take a minute to let us know, let the panelists know. And maybe we'll skip the second polling question about what factors are most integral. Okay, so 67% are very close to retiring within a year or two, and 75 and 25%. Okay, so a good spread. We'll skip the next poll so we can go to questions. If there are any questions, please put them in the chat, and I will be moderating the chat. So from Carrie Bernard, is it, oh, sorry, no, these are all questions about the polls, sorry. So
Viola,
yeah.
can I was going to just speak really quickly, maybe while people are organizing themselves.
Sure.
The preparation for retirement, which I think is pretty critical to most of the people involved. I really wanted to support this idea of, finding a way to spend a longer period of time 24/7 with your spouse or partner. And I was able to do that in a 3-month sabbatical in 2013, which seems like a long time ago, but it was a good time to do it. And one of the other things we did was, and it's part of the financial side, which is so really, really important, we got a new roof on the house. We got a new dishwasher, washing machine, dryer. We got some new upholstery on a lot of the old furniture, just that kind of thing, because knowing that it would be much more difficult, once there wasn't a larger income coming in. The other thing I wanted to mention, because it struck me as funny at the time I did it, but I've never regretted it. So in 2013, 10 years ago, my hairdresser announced that he was retiring. And I had always had the same hairdresser for 50 years since I was in medical school. So I decided that while I was away from work, I would let my hair grow out, because then I would be able to trim it myself for the rest of time, and I wouldn't need to worry about finding a hairdresser. So as they say, some of the things you might choose to do could be a little funny, but a lot of it is this idea of, as David said, the long runway. And I guess the other question, what would I do differently? I certainly, now I see the advantage of retiring earlier, because I didn't anticipate the trouble my husband would be in for a year or more. And the same thing with some of my friends who are married to older people. So I realize now I kind of missed out on some of that, although I really enjoyed my last 3 years of practice, because I was able to help a lot of people get their metabolic syndrome under control. So to me, it's a balance there.
Thank you, Helen. So there are some questions in the chat. And so the question from Christopher Woolman, sorry, I can't see the full last name, is to the panelists, is there any consideration given to part-time retirement? And this question also links to 2 comments, one from June Carroll and one from Marianne Below, about actually transitioning into retirement, like stopping a certain part of your practice, but say continuing in palliative care or research. So any consideration given to part-time retirement? So David, I'll go to you.
Thanks. That's an important question. And I alluded to that in what I was doing. I think many physicians find that they gradually give up segments of practice. You know, at the beginning, when June and I were in Sioux Lookout, we did obstetrics, inpatient, emergency, and ongoing care. And I continued with most of that when I started teaching at the Western. And then at one point, Emerge had to go. And I kept up with obstetrics and patient care in the office, as I say, until 2017. So a lot of physicians do narrow down their scope of practice. And in the chat, people have alluded to moving to palliative care or other more focused practices. So that's not uncommon. And then having a something like a research or an admin interest in something that you can carry on when you stop clinical work and that may not be full-time is another way that people do it. And of course, there are some people who throw themselves into full-time admin or academic jobs. And as I say, I alluded to the fact that for me, it was gradual. So the last 2 years that I worked, I was notionally 3 half days a week as vice chair in the department. It bled into other times, but it was very rewarding. And quite frankly, the relief of not doing clinical work was quite huge and was the right time for me. As I say, it was occasioned by health. And people have alluded to that as well. That's something that, you know, you need to have health insurance throughout your working life. And you need to be prepared to take a retirement earlier if something major happens to your own health.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, David. And so the next question I'll grab from the chat is directed towards Dr. Batty, and it's from Brian Schwartz. With regards to, Helen, can you share how you adapted to the illness in your family?
Yes, actually.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I actually just painfully typed it into the chat, but in some ways it was easier because it was obvious to everybody that our family was struggling, and you know, a lot of things were going to be either changed or, you know, we had to pass up on. So, you know, we used to go to the TSO, and obviously we weren't going to buy a year's subscription to the TSO. That was an easy decision. But that personally, I found the hardest thing was lack of sleep and disturbed sleep, because I initially thought, oh, but I'm used to this. I used to deliver babies for many years. I used to be on call, et cetera, et cetera. But I found it was different because it was really every day with no end in sight for some months. So I had to realize that I actually had to take a nap every afternoon, just the way I tell other people to do. But as I say, it just meant that things got down to really the core bare minimum, but also helped because now my feeling coming out the other side of that is, well, gee, you know, I'm just adding back in the things that are easy to do or actually enjoyable to do. So learning to play Catan has turned out to be, you know, something that I can add into my schedule. It's very flexible. I'm practicing online, etc. I remember all those, you know, friends I had, and my mother's generation of stay-at-home mothers who all used to get together to play bridge, etc., etc. I thought, sure, I can play a game online. I can learn this. It was great when I was not reading because I'd had my cataracts fixed and I had no glasses that worked. So, but as I say, it was an experience, and luckily it was practice for the next time it happens, when perhaps it'll be more final, but I'll be more ready.
So thank you, Helen. So I want to thank Nick and Sheila and Leah, who put in factors they're considering as integral to their retirement. So please take a moment to read the chat. But I think the final question will be from Sandy Buckman, who has commented in the chat that family medicine is all about the relationships. One of the challenges of retirement is maintaining the social networks and the valued collegial professional connections. Is there a retired family physicians association at the DFCM where these relationships can be maintained and nurtured? I'm going to go to Barb to answer that, and it's an excellent segue to the end with the resources and the options. But Barb, do you want to take that question from Sandy?
Hi, Sandy. Great to know that you're part of this workshop, and your sister as well. So, I think fondly of the workshop that we gave on navigating transitions in our careers. And I kept all those slides, by the way. There is no formal group for retired physicians in our department. And I think that's certainly something that I would think is going to be very valuable to consider. And Viola, if you're looking for opportunities for building more events where mentorship can be incorporated into people who are retired, but we still have a link with the department, I think that would be a lovely idea. I can think of one of my dear colleagues, Barney Giblin, who even though he was retired, would always come back to events that our department ran, and he was such a wise elder, and he stayed on even our DFCM conference planning committee for many years. But I felt that he was really a good example of somebody who was retired but still continued to want to make a difference and to connect with his colleagues. So I think those are some of the ideas I have about other people that I know that have gone on in good health to be able to have that role. And I think this is where the health piece does really factor into it. So those are some of the thoughts I have about people that I've seen going ahead that have been retired that have made a difference. But we don't have a formal group. And Viola, you could apply for a grant.
Lots to think about. And so I am going to segue to the final slide in the interest of time. So Maddie, if you could put that up. And once again, I am appealing to everyone to take 1 or 2 minutes to give me your feedback. It's not a traditional evaluation form. It's feedback to inform programming. And so Maddie's going to put that link in the chat. But Maddie, if you could go to the slide prior to that. So in terms of the DFCM, I feel so fortunate that I've had the opportunity to collaborate with each of the panelists, and I have benefited so much from mentorship myself. So this is a passion, and there are opportunities. So if you have more questions, I know Deb had a question in the chat, and I'll have to think about that answer, but if you want to connect with a mentor, there are coffee chats, there's one-to-one mentoring, and there's group mentorship, and there's special events. So stay tuned to the DFCM listserv. Everyone who attended today in a week will get a package of resources. So Barb, if you can send your book list, that would be great. But what I do think is useful is to look at these 4 resources that were curated based on your questions. And David had referred to a few of these, but the first is The Aging Physician, Maintaining Competency and Practicing Safely. The second, by Pauline Pariser, is Reflections on Retirement. Is this the way to say goodbye? A very compelling article, so please take a look. And then Critical Reflections on Physician Retirement, and a systemic review, actually. Silver et al. Have done a systemic review on looking at physician retirement and talking about the average age and the factors that go into considering this. So I encourage everyone to let me know your thoughts. I want to end by thanking all of the panelists. It was heartfelt. It was great to hear lots of points to ponder. And I want to thank Maddie once again for helping to organize. So I think we'll stay open for a minute or 2, but thank you so much. And yes, Barb, I think there'll be hopefully a part 2 in the fall, and hopefully some sort of GFCM group. If
I'm gonna ask Maddie to put up the cartoon that I suggested.
oh yeah,
Back to that.
Maddie, could you put the cartoon?
Yes, just one moment.
And this actually cartoon came to me because Kirk wanted to contribute something to this through me.
I like the cartoon.
If you can find it.
Oh.
So this says the real reason what many men don't live long after retiring. So you have a fellow saying, just a week at home. I've come up with a comprehensive list on how to do things more efficiently around here, honey. So.
Very funny. And Barb, there's a question in the chat. So for whoever's still on, someone's asking about the mini sabbatical you referred to, and they're asking, how do you find locum coverage? So before you answer, I just want to say that we do know that that's a need in the department, and I think they're looking, Danielle is looking at, is looking at options. I don't want to say any more or less, but Barb, if you could answer that.
Well, because I was in a large academic group, what we were finding is that when we had excellent second-year family medicine residents who were finishing up and we're doing locums, we would often be able to invite people to come back to be either clinical associates or to do locums for a variety of us in the same team. And so it meant that they could do a locum for me for 2 months, and they could do a locum for somebody else for 2 months. So we were able to find ways to keep our residents that we wanted to still have some connection with by offering them these positions after they finished at the end of June. So for a couple of years, that was something that it was a win-win for everybody.
Thank you, Barb. And so lots of thanks and appreciation. David, Helen, Barb, lots of comments in the chat. People are very thankful for sharing your insights and your guidance. Thank you. And thanks, Amy. So I think there's still 30 people on. How was this